We are fortunate to have with us Father Joel E. Tabara of the Society of Jesus and the president of the Ateneo de Davao University to help us deepen our understanding of the past 5 sessions in relation to the document on human fraternity, with a synthesis of the past 2 days. After the synthesis, we will be foregoing the small breakout sessions and instead have a plenary discussion. So let's all welcome Father Joel with a virtual round of applause.
Hello. Good afternoon to everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Father.
Yes,
Good
Father.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now I will try to share. So please be patient with me.
Go, Father.
Okay. Do you see that text?
Yes, Father.
Okay. It's a little long. It's something like 11 pages. But we've tried to do a little synthesis, a synthesis which will invite everyone to reflection. And the point of the reflection would be on the basis of what we've experienced here in this conference on healing and reconciliation, moving towards human fraternity. Where do we go from here? Okay. So, excuse me, in this conference, we have recalled two religious leaders, Pope Francis and Ahmed Al-Tayeb, coming together in Abu Dhabi last February 3rd to 4th, 2019. From the depths of their encounter with the one creator and compassionate God, though their faiths were different, they took a giant step towards peace in the world. The heart of the declaration they authored and published together, the document on fraternity for world peace and living together, which I will refer to as DWPLT, was in the name of the one God, Al-Azhar al-Sharif and the Muslims of East and West, with the Catholic Church and the Catholics of East and West, declare the adoption of dialogue as the path, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, reciprocal understanding as the method and standard. This is the central statement of the document for world peace and on fraternity for world peace and living together. It was a position which was welcomed in the world as wars took the lives of innocent people, rendered people poor and destitute, created orphans, widows, refugees, exiled people from their homes and countries, deprived them of security, peace, and the possibility of living together. Embracing that message, we say, no more war, no more violence, no more lives wasted on terror, killing, vengeance, hatred, and animosity. Instead, we commit ourselves to human fraternity, the sisterhood and brotherhood of human beings, created by the one God, that has been torn apart by policies of extremism and division, by systems of unrestrained profit, by hateful ideological tendencies that manipulate the actions and the future of men and women. This is stated in the name of freedom, in the name of justice and mercy, in the name of all persons of goodwill, in the name of God. We do well to remind ourselves of some of the document's stunning declarations. First, the firm conviction that authentic teachings of religions, with authentic underscored, authentic teachings of religions invite us to remain rooted in the values of peace, to defend the values of mutual understanding, human fraternity, and harmonious coexistence. They invite us to reestablish wisdom, justice, and love, and to reawaken religious awareness among the young people so that the future generations may be protected from the realm of materialistic thinking and from dangerous policies of unbridled greed and indifference that are based on the law of force and not on the force of law. Are you still with me? Yes?
Yes, Father.
Yes,
Okay.
yes po.
So to reawaken religious awareness, we're not shy about our religious relationship to God. Second, freedom is the right of every person. Each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. The pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in his wisdom, through which he created human beings. When I first read this, I was shocked because I was raised to believe there is only one belief and there's only one way to get to God. And you are not free to believe in something not true. So this is a very important statement. Freedom is the right of every person. Each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. The pluralism and the diversity of religions are willed by God in his wisdom, through which he created human beings diverse. Third, justice based on mercy is the path to follow in order to live a dignified life to which every human being has a right. Fourth, dialogue promotes a culture of tolerance and reduces economic, social, political, and environmental problems. Fifth, dialogue among believers means coming together in the vast space of spiritual, human, and social and shared social values, and transmitting the highest moral values that religions aim for. Sixth, places of worship are to be protected. Seventh, terrorism is deplorable. Eighth, citizenship is based on equality of rights and duties under which all enjoy justice. Ninth, good relations between East and West, affirmation of fundamental human rights in the East and the West. 10th, the right of women to education and employment and to exercise their own political rights. 11th, the right of children to grow up in a family environment, to receive nutrition, education, and support. 12th, the elderly, the weak, the disabled, the oppressed, their protection is a serious obligation. We are happy that Secretary Carlito Galvez reaffirmed these principles in his opening keynote address at the outset of this conference, especially in the light of the transformation of OPAP, the Office of the Presidential Assistant in the peace process, to OPAPRU, to the Presidential Assistance for Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity. After the first conference on healing and reconciliation at Ateneo de Davao in 2019, Secretary Galvez said he would incorporate the document on fraternity for world peace and living together into the operation of the OPAP. In this conference, we see how he kept his word and how this document is not just a guiding inspiration for OPAPRU, but has been implemented in many of the programs of the OPAPRU. It has not just contented itself with working for a peace process, ending a forced or peace process, ending in a forced or agreed upon cessation of violence and killing. The peace where people are still wounded and interiorly angered by the causes of war and conflict. It has gone beyond this raw peace and forced by force to a peace based on reconciliation and unity, on the insight that warring peoples are ultimately brothers and sisters created by the one God, and that therefore in fraternity, where there has been conflict, peace, reconciliation, where there has been conflict, peace, reconciliation, and unity are called for in fraternity. And unto fraternity, the culture of dialogue is the path, mutual cooperation is the code of conduct, reciprocal understanding is the method and standard. During our first healing and reconciliation meeting in 2019, we suggested many things that we read, comprehend, study, meditate, reflect on, and pray over this document, especially during the Christian period of Lent and the Muslim period of Ramadan, that we undertake to make this document known, that we adopt it formally in our organizations, that we request the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines and the National Association of Bangsamoro Education Incorporated to spread appreciation of it in our schools, that we request the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines and the Muslim Association of Ulamas to spread its appreciation in our faith communities or in our umas, and that we urge the Bangsamoro Transition Authority to adopt this document for the BARM, and that our youth spread its appreciation. Much of this work has begun, particularly in the programs of the OPAPRU, but it is still a work that is incomplete. So in our session 1, we saw 11 thesis statements on the document on human fraternity for peace and living together, presented by Dr. Roe Kimba. The document on fraternity for world peace and living together has meanwhile been complemented by the 160-page papal encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which means we are all brothers and sisters. Fratelli Tutti declares this: we are all brothers and sisters. Fratelli Tutti challenges all in social friendship to tear down the barriers that block the realization of fraternity. This is what was impressed on us in the conference by Ateneo de Davao University theologian, Dr. Roy Kimba. He presented 11 theses from the Fratelli Tutti that draw out the meaning of the document on fraternity for peace and living together, including its 11th thesis. As its 11th thesis, the latter's central message on dialogue, mutual collaboration, and reciprocal understanding. In fact, the document on fraternity is substantially incorporated into the encyclical as part of the closing appeal of the apostolic letter in paragraph 285. And I quote this now: "In my fraternal meeting, which I gladly recall, with the Grand Imam Ahmed Al-Tayeb, we resolutely declare that religion must never incite war, hateful attitudes, hostility, and extremism, nor must they incite violence or the shedding of blood. These tragic realities are the consequence of a deviation from religious teachings. They result from a political manipulation of religions and from interpretations made by religious groups who, in the course of history, have taken advantage of the power of religious sentiment in the hearts of men and women. God the Almighty has no need to be defended by anyone and does not want his name to be used to terrorize people. For this reason, I would like to reiterate here the appeal for peace. And here, Pope Francis quotes almost word for word, verbatim, the substance of the document on fraternity for world peace and living together. So today, however, we must accept that the core message of this document is yet unlearned. When this document was issued in 2019, wars rooted in religion involved Muslims fighting Muslims in such places as Syria and Yemen. The images of violence and wars perpetrated by followers of Islam, the religion that prizes salam or peace, were heartrending and painful. Today, the core teaching of the fraternity document remains unlearned in the sad conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where conflict is among those whom the Lord mandates to love one another, and in case of violence, to turn the other cheek. Remarkably, the Christian Russian Orthodox Church, or at least its Patriarch Kirill, blesses the war effort of Russia to reincorporate Ukraine into Russia. This is opposed by the Christian Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, who acknowledge the political independence of Ukraine. Still controversial is the legitimacy of war and killing in the face of aggression and the brutal killing of civilian women, children, and the elderly. It is in this world that the document on fraternity for world peace and living together remains urgently relevant. We may notice we are talking about fraternity for world peace and living together. This is what we are interested in. If you wish, in the COP language, this is our domain. It is a fraternity based on an affirmation of God, our creator, and on our religious relationship with this creator God. We do not apologize for this relationship as a secular world shoves the religious relationship into a private sphere. It is based on our human relationship with one another, based on, influenced, and uplifted by this relationship with God. We are brothers and sisters in his creation of ourselves in this created world. And this gives our humanity an essential and compelling dignity based on our being created together in God's goodness. This is why in cases of conflict, in cases of injustice that does violence to the dignity of human being as created by God, when concerns in the world, our jealousy, our greed, our lust, our thirst for power, allow us to forget our relationship to one another based on our relationship to God, that we must in dialogue seek to solve our conflicts in the context of this wounded or threatened fraternity, and to re-establish fraternity through mutual cooperation in fraternity and reciprocal understanding of fraternity. Fraternity would be the domain, mutual cooperation, practice, and reciprocal understanding of fraternity, community in the categories of COP. The cooperation in fraternity actually allows us to uplift our fraternity, mediated by deepened dialogue and deeper reciprocal understanding of who we are as brothers and sisters. The Conference on Healing and Reconciliation II, moving on to human fraternity, was therefore an opportunity again for communal meditation on the challenges of pursuing and implementing fraternity among sectoral representatives through dialogue on shared or yet possible cooperation within diverse communities of practice, and for a deeper understanding of fraternity through the dialogue of life as demonstrated by the late Bishop Bienvenido Tudtud. We have heard from representatives of different sectors, religious, the BARM, the CEAP, the Madaris and the Bangsamoro, the public and private colleges and universities, Lumad groups, non-Moro IP groups, youth groups, peace center, and peace-building civil society organizations, the women's sectors, representatives of business and entrepreneurs, and media. You still with me, or are you asleep? Hello?
We're here,
I'm still
Father.
here,
Hello,
Father.
Okay.
Father.
We can continue then. Now, the next session is on OPAPRU. The session OPAPRU is a comprehensive peace process on OPAPRU's comprehensive peace process initiatives and the document of human fraternity presented by Director Vanessa Palarco of the OPAPRU, now in implementation of Executive Order 158, strengthening the policy framework on peace, reconciliation, and unity, and reorganizing the government's administrative structures for this purpose. It begins with a reiteration of President Duterte's commitment to implement all the signed peace agreements. But it reviews the 6-point peace development agenda. And that is here. The GPH-MILF peace process, and then 2, the GPH-MNLF final peace agreement, and then 3rd, the whole of nation approach based on EO 70, that is the National Task Force, and local community armed conflict, LCAC. 4th, the closure agreements with the Cordillera Badong Administration, Cordillera People's Liberation Army, and the Revolutionary Proletarian Army, Alex Moncayo Brigade. 5th, very important for us in fraternity, social healing and peace building, preventing violent extremism and other peace building initiatives. 6th, the Payapa at Masaganang Pamayanan, PAMANA program, and other socioeconomic interventions in conflict-afflicted areas. This is a basic, this 6-point peace agenda is fundamental to understanding what OPAPRU is doing. Because it's based on this that various programs are unraveled, right? So, based on this, the comprehensive peace process of government is conflict sensitive and peace promoting through direct and meaningful engagements with rebel groups and communities at the grassroots. Notice that this is not only the office of the peace process with peace panels talking to peace panels. That was what it was for a long time. But now OPAPRU is saying the comprehensive peace process of government is conflict sensitive and peace promoting through direct and meaningful engagements with rebel groups and communities at the grassroots in dialogue in order to achieve, through mutual cooperation, a permanent resolution to conflict. A permanent resolution to conflict. This is achieved peace, reconciliation, and unity. The reciprocal understanding called forth by fraternity. You see, the OPAPRU is implementing the key statements of the document on Fraternity for World Peace. In the whole of society approach, it is not just the government seeking a ceasefire with competence, it is all members of society working together to resolve conflict through dialogue, cooperation, deeper understanding of one another in fraternity. It is empowering different actors in society to move from signed paper agreements for peace towards a future of a just and lasting peace in realized fraternity. Right? In realized fraternity, this comprehensive peace process, whose goals and strategies are anchored on embedding peace, reconciliation, and unity in the social fabric, enhancing resiliency for peace, social, economic, and political re-engineering. We'll see more of this later. So, OPAPRU's aspiration for conflict-affected areas. What does it aspire to? It aspires to the normalization and transformative programs for former rebels in conflict-affected areas, in order to produce peaceful and productive individuals in peaceful and productive and resilient communities. So a normalization and transformation of individuals and communities, from rebels to peaceful and productive individuals, from conflict-affected areas to peaceful, productive, and resilient communities. This involves the pursuit of fraternity through dialogue, mutual cooperation, reciprocal understanding. For instance, the resolution of the root causes of armed conflict. It's the whereas 2 in EO 156. These root causes of armed conflict are grasped in dialogue. For instance, religious discrimination, or the desire to convert the other to one's true religion, or religious or social othering. Because you are different, I will other you. I will say you are an enemy. Hatred, injustice in land use, injustice in clashes of local legal systems and a legal system imposed by Manila. Filipino citizenship, perceived as inimical to belonging to Muslim or Lumad communities. Before, in history, Filipino citizenship implied being a Christian. And so Filipino citizenship was painful to the Muslim and the Muslim Lumad. Violence, state violence, vengeance, revolution, economic marginalization, educational injustice. We come to an understanding of the root causes of armed conflict when in dialogue, we understand why those who are in conflict enter into conflict. And secondly, embedding peace, reconciliation, and unity in the social fabric means involving direct and meaningful engagements, which is action, with the rebel groups and the effective communities at the grassroots level in order to reach a peaceful settlement and a permanent resolution to conflict. And enhancing resilience for peace, this is establishing conflict-affected persons and communities back into the way of peace, making them resistant to threats to peace, where peace continues to be threatened by cultural insensitivity, by cultural bullying, by corruption, by eruptions of violence, by the inefficiencies in government, by politics unresponsive to the demands of fraternity, where people also have to learn how to make peace. So the activities on the way to peace in fraternity consisted with the 6-point peace agenda. Director Vanessa went into a lot of detail here, but if you notice, they are activities which are aligned with the 6-point peace process. So under Program 1, we focus on the MILF, the Bangsamoro Organic Law ratified, the Bangsamoro Transition Authority established, arms surrendered in a track towards normalization, 16 private armed groups disbanded, combatants decommissioned, MILF camps, once used for war, now transformed and developed into areas for peace. MILF combatants now acting as leaders for peace. For instance, Al-Hajj Ibrahim and Mohager Iqbal. Then Program 2, referring basically to the MNLF, 2 MNLF groups, the Miswari group, the Sema group, re-engaged for peace, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, supporting and monitoring the peace agreements, the gaps in the implementation of the 1996 final peace agreements addressed, the MNLF cooperation in addressing peace and security concerns in Sulu. Program 3, localized peace engagements, mainstreaming localized peace engagements in community consultations. There are 76 documented, and peace dialogues, there are 23 documented with former communist terrorist groups. And the example of the peace village in Talaingod, Davao del Norte, the reintegration of 125 Atamonobo families, healing and reconciliation activities. Program 4, referring to the Revolutionary Proletarian Army, the Alex Bongayo Brigade. There was the signing of the clarificatory document 19 years after the 2000 peace agreement. The 3-year normalization program and reintegration of the Kapatiran members, and now the ongoing implementation of the 5-year normalization program. Program 5, social healing and peace building. Many programs for women, peace and security, for indigenous peoples, for the youth, the National Action Plan on preventing, countering, and transforming violent extremism, the conflict sensitivity and peace process, the peace education mainstreaming. Then Program 6, the Payapa at Masaganang Pamayanan program. The socioeconomic services, 55.1 billion going to conflict-afflicted areas and conflict vulnerable areas. The community-driven development projects, the sub-regional economic development projects, such as agricultural support, bridges, electrification, flood control. So we see convincingly, I think, how in the OPAPRU, the document on fraternity for world peace and reconciliation is being implemented. The next session was mutual cooperation through communities of peace. Lessons from organizations on the ground, presented by Ms. Sarah Mesurier and attorney Jennifer Buan. The talk was of the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, or the GSERF, which is completely dedicated to preventing violent extremism and is working in 15 different countries. As they said, a new player in the field in the Philippines, but now wielding much influence. The focus of the GSERF for this conference was mutual cooperation through communities of practice. But it also says that it guides global funds and resources to local hands, it being the only global fund focused exclusively in preventing violent extremism. So it brings funding to frontline organizations or to consortia with community-based organizations. But it is more than a fund. It is interested in capacity building, in knowledge sharing, in coordination, in national and global communities of practice. So we got a very good introduction to here to GSERF and what GSERF is doing. It also mentioned it is in the service of inclusivity and diversity in education and governance, in engaging the youth, in community consultation and livelihood, access to good quality education, in country support mechanisms, which link local initiatives to national structures, inclusive police and service provisions, local governance actors, and nonviolent conflict resolutions. It mentioned its 8 grantees. So for our conference, it focused on communities of practice. This is a relatively new methodology where groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So in the presentation of the GSERF, it spoke about a global alliance platform using the COP to bring about knowledge sharing, capacity building, and advocacy. And it spoke about national communities of practice, sharing advocacy for peace building and conflict prevention, regular interaction and dialogue, stronger relationships through peace, through community and team building, sharing and exchange, and stronger impact of these groups. Now it ends with a statement: COPs should be about human fraternity. And I think the statement is made because the COP as such need not be about human fraternity. Doing to better doing, to higher skills, through regular interaction is what the COP is about. And the essentials of a COP are the domain, an identity defined by a shared area of interest. The community, the people related to one another through the domain, they care about their standing with each other as they interact within the domain. And the practice. The practice they practice, and they're not just interested in shared practice, enabling them to learn from one another. So on reflection, not all COPs qualify as dialogue in the sense of the document on fraternity for world peace and living together. But a COP can be one that does this. COPs are in themselves community and practice insensitive. A COP whose domain is sowing terror or profiting from corruption or exploiting society for private gain is recognizable as a COP. But this is certainly not in the sense of the document on fraternity for world peace and living together. A COP that seeks to practice the document for fraternity and world peace and living together has as its domain human fraternity, which recognizes in humanity a sisterhood and brotherhood as created by God. All who work together towards human fraternity through dialogue, mutual cooperation, and reciprocal understanding are communities of praxis. But not all communities of practice promote human fraternity. For instance, communities of practice whose domains are the eradication of religion, terrorism, human trafficking, the weapons trade, and the like. Dialogue as the path against violent extremism or against the misuse of madaris for terrorism is a dialogue towards fraternity. Mutual collaboration through better doing, that would be the practice, and deepen reciprocal understanding would be the community. As an example of this, we have the Madaris Volunteer Program as an example of fraternity-motivated dialogue. How in living with a family in a village of a different culture where there has been conflict in the past, in intercultural dialogue, in learning of the values and practices of religion, not one's own, in learning to relate to the other in this context without proselytization. This is intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue. So dialogue, mutual cooperation. Here the activity, the practice is teaching government-mandated subjects in Madaris, working together with teachers unto this end, in training teachers to improve their skills, and reciprocal understanding. The aha experiences of who the Muslim is or who the Christian is. The aha experience that collaboration is possible, respect, achievement of a higher level of fraternity. So, in and towards fraternity, the Madaris Volunteer Program is also a COP, a community of practice, and that is explained there. So we go on to session 4, that should be session 4. Business involvement in peace, prevention of conflict, and resilience. This was a very engaging presentation this morning by Dr. Francisco Lara Jr. Basically, the business sector can promote prosperity, stability, and in conflict-prone and conflict-affected areas. And the statement, the business community is an underutilized asset for peace. Problems, however, here are the risks in conflict areas, the corruption, the market failures are considerable. Strategies to capitalize on the business sector for peace must consider the enterprise's size, whether they are private or public, which industries they are involved with, interconnectedness with the supply chain. Incentives should be developed for good corporate citizenship, strengthened international initiatives, incorporation of the local community into the global value chain, and the global consensus on appropriate conflict-sensitive business processes. Dr. Lara spoke about many issues. We will be getting documents coming from him about these issues. I've just listed a number of issues that he mentioned. I will not go through them all anymore. But one was do no harm, do good, promote fraternity, etc. So under this concept of business involvement for peace, we can talk about dialogue in the context of fraternity, where dialogue must address the conflict between the profit motive and the responsiveness of government, of business through commerce to human need and building fraternity. Dialogue must process the experience of fraternity destructive commerce when consumption is motivated by profit and profit-driven consumerism. It must overcome what Pope Francis calls the technocratic paradigm. Technology augmented overproduction that abuses the environment, exploiting timber, minerals, oil, natural gas, and discards useless people to privilege producers, owners in feeding and increasing consumerism. It must process the experience of cronyism, abusive work conditions, the legacies of colonialism. So under business involvement for peace, much dialogue is warranted, but also much cooperation. The challenge towards producing goods, providing jobs, sharing technology necessary for human consumption without falling into consumerism. Here, the human being must control production. That is the economy through good politics. This is a position of Pope Francis. Meanwhile, living in an environmentally responsible manner is called for in fraternity. Reducing the carbon footprint, proper garbage disposal, preserving forests, making space on the planet for other species. In Mindanao, business and business supportive activities in government policy and education should be used to spread the use of renewable energy, environmentally responsible agriculture versus, for instance, monocrop plantations, and to protect the fresh water supply, or to develop the halal food industry, or to develop responsible tourism versus such as investments in open pit mining. Dialogue and mutual cooperation should end in reciprocal understanding, deeper insight into what the human being in fraternity is, into what human needs need to be responded to in commerce, production, and the exploitation of the earth, into what fraternity implies for living in an environmentally threatened globe. An understanding of what corporate citizenship means. Fraternity-inspired ethical behavior in business strategy, operations, and culture. Session 5 was the dialogue of life and the document on human fraternity, lessons from Bishop Tutut's life and works by Brother Carl Gaspar. And here we basically saw the early practice of interreligious dialogue of faith and life in Mindanao through Bishop Bienvenido Tutut. Brother Carl brought up many points, especially the point of the dialogue of life and faith. That was the legacy of Bishop Tutut, and how this was reflected in various other documents of the church. Bishop Tutut was followed by Archbishop Fernando Nanding Kapalya, who in dialoguing with the Muslims and Protestant Christians convened the Bishops' Ulama Conference, which was later funded by the government. Dialogue today continues what was begun long ago. And there is a need to continue to address issues, for instance, the lack of resources in Muslim areas and the like. Brother ended his presentation also with a reading from the document for Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together. I hope you're still with me. You still there?
Yes, Father.
Father, yes.
Are you
Yes,
okay?
yes. Yes.
Okay. I need some water. Okay. Here are our suggestions for reflection, and I hope we can come together after this for some plenary reflection, okay? So, what must be considered in our ongoing commitment towards fraternity? What must be considered in this ongoing commitment towards fraternity? Something that we must ultimately define for ourselves in terms of our personal, in terms of our presumed adoption of dialogue as the path, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, and reciprocal understanding as the method and standard. Hopefully, this, after all we've gone through, is not just a government program or set of government programs as we've seen in the OPAP room, or not just a fashionable concept-rich ideology, that we like today and unlike tomorrow. We are in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, some would say VUCA world. And it is hard to think of ourselves in abstraction from this VUCA world. I think Dr. Lara mentioned this. So, in this world, how do dialogue, mutual collaboration, and reciprocal understanding advance fraternity in a VUCA society of wars, geopolitical conflicts, the West versus Russia versus China, in a world of climate change, diminishing water supplies, changing administrations, the fourth industrial revolution, the social upheavals still in Muslim, Lumad, and urban communities of Mindanao. The pandemic, still not finished, but will still be followed by other pandemics. There is here need for competence, medical competence, organizational competence, and integrity to respond to future pandemics. There is need for social justice. What do pandemics have to do with fraternity? The Ukraine-Russian war is emblematic of a clash between autocracy and democracy. Where are we here? Do we believe people have the will to, and not just the right to, participate in government? Or is it more efficient to leave this to a small group of leaders? Do we believe people have the will to participate in government? Or is it more efficient to leave this to a small group of leaders? Are they interested to participate in local and national discussions towards fraternity in the common good? Or is it easier to be indifferent? Is it easier to say, sila na lang, let government take care of it? And if there's injustice, sila na lang. The Ukraine-Russian war is emblematic also of the clash between religious convictions, the Russian versus the Ukrainian Orthodox Church versus the Roman Catholic Church, and secular rationality. Fraternity is more than morally ambiguous, secularized humanity, or morally indifferent, secularized humanity. So, yet we have religious conflicts between Israel, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Iran. The Ukraine-Russian war is illustrative of the crying need for dialogue, mutual collaboration, and reciprocal understanding, as in the Document for World Peace and Living Together. could the Ukraine-Russian war have been prevented by dialogue, mutual collaboration, reciprocal understanding? Then in our situation, let's look at the challenge of China and of the West as guarantors of or threats to our national sovereignty. What a fraternity here. Or the challenge of climate change, the COP26 challenge, and the expected flooding in coastal cities due to increased sea levels as the challenge of climate change is not met. And the destruction of crops in Mindanao that is expected due to global warming if the challenge of climate change is not met. The other environmental challenges that we face, like open pit mining, the threat to our fresh water supplies, monocrop farming, or genetically modified organizing that are making us dependent on companies in Europe for our agriculture and killing what is endemic to our own country for our agriculture. The destruction of forests and of habitats of biodiverse species. And then what was brought up many times by Mus Ledasan, the effect of the probable change of administration on fraternity. We see people or peoples divided or polarized by partisan politics. How do we relate to the Mindanaoan movement for peace? A big question. OPAPRU is still here. Will OPAPRU leadership and policies change with a change of administration? Is the commitment to fraternity only as good as the policy determinations of this administration? While the peace agreements with the MILF and the MNLF are not yet fully fulfilled, while there is still the ongoing conflict with the CPP, NPA, NDFP, while there is the commitment to fraternity and yet terrible red tagging that sometimes ends in killing, the ongoing strength of traditional Muslim families, the presence still of RIDO. What's going to happen to all of this with a change in administration, with a change in OPAPRU? Will the government's and civil society's supportive attitude towards the present leadership of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority and of the BARM remain? Will our support of fraternity through the culture of dialogue, mutual cooperation, and increased reciprocal understanding remain? And if so, what would be the role of government, the role of religions, the role of CSOs, the role of families, the role of individual citizens, of each child of God, the role of people's organizations, and the role of education? I end with quotations from two holy books. The first Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Not as the world alone gives peace, is the peace I give you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. The culture of dialogue, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, and reciprocal understanding as the method and standard represents, therefore, not only our relationship with human beings, but our covenanted relationship with God. And from the Quran, therein they will hear no abusive speech, nor any talk of sin, only the saying, peace, peace. Thank you very much for your attention and your patience in listening to this long synthesis, but I hope it brought things together. Good afternoon to you all. Maybe we can do some sharing on what your thoughts are on what I have raised. Patricia?
Thank you, Joel, for the very well put synthesis of the past 2 days session and presenting it in a way that shows how it all ties up to the document and fraternity for world peace and reconciliation. And more so for the thought-provoking questions that you've posed to our participants. The questions are truly confronting and maybe overwhelming, but are also questions that need to be asked. Mga tanong na kailangan pagnilayan kahit pagkatapos ng conference na ito. So I would like to encourage everyone present here now to maybe share a few of your insights from the past and from the synthesis that Father Joel has given us, questions that he has. The group would like to share to the hand, or you could also type it in the chat box. Yes, I think there was a bit of a lag with the internet, but yes, again, I would like to open the floor to anyone who would like to share their thoughts or answers to the questions that Father Joel has presented to us. Ayun. Ma'am Liza said maybe we need a little more time to reflect on the questions. Sige po. Please let us know if there's anyone who would like to share. Ayun, Miss Francisina Bitang has raised her hand.
Thank you, Atit, Father Joel. Hep hep hooray for peace in Mindanao. Good afternoon, everyone. I am in awe of this man. Thank you very much for the privilege to be with you in our small group in Group 2, Father Joel. As you were doing the synthesis, I wrote down many keywords, but I'd like to focus more on the gratitude level and mentioning joy in diversity. There is grace in diversity. There's blessing in diversity. It is willed by God in His wisdom. I also was able to write down a keyword that justice is based on mercy. This is so heartwarming. This is so comforting, especially in these very difficult times of the pandemic, maybe post-pandemic. for mentioning the need to collaborate more, that real work needs to be done after this. That's why I requested Ate Tessa if I could get hold of your very amazing synthesis, because we need it. Nelson and I will need it for our ministries in Mindanao. Thank you, Father Joel, for this great afternoon with you. It's raining where I am, but I'd like to say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you po. Anyone else who would like to share their thoughts? Ryan Aragon also raised his hand. Ryan, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone, and to Father Tabora and to the organizers. Before I proceed, can I be heard clearly po?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Once again, thank you, Father Joel, for that very comprehensive and in-depth analysis and reflection of the salient points of the inputs given by our discussants. I am a teacher in the Aro Junior High School, grade 7, teaching social studies. And I believe that the inputs shared by our discussants are very relevant, especially on the aspect of education and global citizenship, which is also being emphasized by our venerable Jesuit fathers and other Ignatian institutions. My reflection for this afternoon will dwell on the role of education in the aspect of strengthening and the building of the culture of peace, because I believe that education is for me the best way to inculcate among our learners and our students the concept of human fraternity, solidarity, understanding, and of course social transformation. As I shared this to our core group, I told them that I can attribute the problems that are happening around the world or in our country in macro and micro level because of the inequality in education, especially in Mindanao, wherein some of our children and students are also affected by learning crisis, which was aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I shared this to my group members that more than ever, the role of education is very crucial, very pivotal in bridging whatever problems and conflicts and gaps brought by generations of violence, generations of hatred and animosity. Personally, I am a product of that generation wherein I was brainwashed that the other religion is evil, the cause of evil in Mindanao. My mother witnessed the horrifying 1970 clash between the Moro and the Christians in our province. The clashes between the Muslim black shirt and the Christian Ilaga vigilante. And because of her experience, she somehow taught me that the other group is the cause of the suffering that is happening in Mindanao during my time. And that was also the mentality of my friends before. But because of the efforts of education, my former mentors, being a product of Notre Dame system, where peace education is very intensive, I came to realize that in order for me and my generation to stop this vicious cycle of misunderstanding and hatred is to study, to learn, and to, of course, accept that that our place is not only for the Christians, it's also for the Muslims and for the Nomads. And I am very thankful for the knowledge and understanding that I got from my mentors in NDU and also in Ateneo. So if I'm going to relate this on a macro level, what's happening in Ukraine and in Europe, in Russia, in Yemen, and Middle East, especially in the aspect of education, also somehow reflects the scenario in the Philippines, the learning crisis that most of the Filipino learners are also experiencing. And that resulted to not only the deficiency in the mastery of academic competencies, but also on the understanding of essential values that are crucial for nation building, such as enlightened nationalism, social engagement, and what else? And fraternity. So that's why I am very much animated by this conference, because as as uh, as a, what do you call this, representative of the academy, especially in the junior high school, where formation of our students are, as I can say, strong. I that that we can also contribute in the, what we call, the enhancement of understanding on the culture of peace, especially that our students um, and pupils need our guidance in understanding these abstract concepts, because at their level they don't really understand these concepts. They only got this information from social media, which are mostly fake news. So that's why we are quite adamant to at least rectify those misconceptions and to unite them, um, uh, based on the spirit of fraternity and human fraternity. So, and based on the input shared by our previous discussant, I am happy that that the role of education and the role of teachers, the role of the youth was highlighted, because as leaders of our country and of this world, and as members of the local community, um, they will uh, they will soon make a name for themselves, make an impact for themselves, and for them to be able to make a positive difference in their time. Uh, uh, it's really crucial for them to understand these concepts, so that they will apply them in their respective careers, family life, in the respective communities and commitments. So I hope that the role of education and the role of youth empowerment will be acknowledged and supported, because I personally believe that it has also a strong impact on on how Mindanao in our country will fare in the aspect of uh, of building a culture of peace. So, yun po, Father. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Sir Ryan. Is there anyone else who would like to share their thoughts? If you're shy to speak or share your thoughts to everyone, you can also write it down on the chat box and we can read it for you. Anyone else? While waiting, siguro, I could probably share as well. Just be listening to everyone and reflecting on what has already been said. No, but tingkad sa akin is the contradiction of wanting to achieve peace, but also in a way needing to step out of the peace that I have been so familiar and comfortable with. And immediately the lines that came to my mind was from a prayer that says, "Disturb us, O Lord," because the only way we can truly work at moving towards peace, just peace, is when we allow the injustices that happen to disturb us and to unlearn all the biases that have been consciously or unconsciously taught to us, or those that we have been accustomed to. And then when we work together and recognize the differences and see the strength in those differences, to build a society that not only accepts those differences but also celebrates them. Also, as what Dr. Lara said, no, it's easier said than done. It's an uphill battle, but it's a worthy battle to fight nonetheless. So, yeah. And we have from Sir Edel Guyana. He says human fraternity can be manifested in dialogue, which is the most important recommended activity to be done to understand and realize our diverse realities towards common good. But to have a facilitative and meaningful dialogue, we need a respectable someone or institution to moderate a dialogue. Who among the sectors of our society should do this and why? It's a reflection and also a question, Father Joel.
Oh, I think we should put that to the group. um,
Yes. Yes. I think, Father, we are the group is very diverse. We have um, organizations from the different sectors, so maybe someone could share also or volunteer. Who among those sectors could and are who or would be willing to moderate this kind of dialogue?
there's the head of the initiatives for dialogue here. We can ask him. Gus?
Nagising ako bigla.
who
Wala.
who is
Kaya-
supposed to moderate the dialogues?
I think everyone should, and anyone should. We're capable of doing this. Even our own grassroots peoples, they have their own elders, they have their own babaylans, they have their own people and processes where we can learn from whom we can learn from in pursuing this dialogue. And dialogue should happen in all levels also. It's not like we need to have one grand dialogue, national dialogue. That's also necessary and important, but what is important, I think, are the local pockets of dialogues, ripples of dialogues on the ground that would eventually maybe turn into a tide or tsunami of dialogue in the entire country. But I wanted to also reflect on the points mentioned by Father Dobora and also earlier by Bishop Tud, which I presented in the chat box right away. This whole idea of tolerating vis-a-vis or tolerance vis-a-vis respect. I think while tolerance is okay, it is not okay to remain there. I think we need to go beyond tolerance. We need to have respect and acceptance. And only in acceptance and respect, because tolerance is enduring something that you don't agree with. You know, it closes the idea of for dialogue when you just tolerate. Parang pinagbibigyan mo na lang yung isa. Okay, kahit hindi ako nag-agree, okay, dyan ka. Peaceful coexistence tayo, dyan ka. So it's not real dialogue if you tolerate. Real dialogue begins with respect and acceptance of the other. And that is what I would like perhaps to stress, that when we do dialogues, that is a prerequisite to dialogue. I saw here, for example, some points, and I would agree maybe that this is the perspective of a particular institution of government. They posted something about this controversial term, which they made controversial, the term about LUMAD. This whole question about the LUMAD term has detracted us from the real issues of the day. Among there is already a position that LUMAD divides, LUMAD is emanated from this and that organization. When I particularly was familiar in the past, and if Brother Carl was here, he would be able to show that even the LUMAD term emanated from the dialogues that the church had initiated in the past, in the 80s. And this was accepted by some of the LUMAD or the IP networks then. And it became de rigueur. It now became controversial when an entity of government branded it as a communist term or a communist laden term. And this created a lot of fissures and division among groups and peoples. And how do we address this thing? And in fact, it detracted us from the issues of the day and just focus on that term. Anyway, there's a lot of work to do, Father, and a lot of things that we need to unpack and even, I think, look into what possibilities and what other things can we do beyond what we have already been doing now in order to forward this whole concept indeed of fraternity. And fraternity is not only between and among different peoples and different groups. It should also be among ourselves, like-minded kindred groups. It should be even within families, within communities, within and among civil society. It should be among our peoples. And maybe dialogue should also first start with ourselves, within ourselves. We dialogue with the contradictions, the concepts that we've been battling within our minds, within our souls, within our hearts. Dialogue should also, I think, start from there. So even if we aim and we do commit to always engage and offer our services or whatever we can in the pursuit of dialogue, and please let us know what we can do. But we are not, I think we also ourselves would need to enter into dialogue with others and other groups in terms of concepts, methodologies, processes, and we learn from an array of different experiences and different diverse practices, if you may.
Thank you, Sir Gus, for sharing your thoughts on the matter. We have another hand raised. Ms. Precious.
Shalom. Good afternoon, everyone. Galabashin. I'm Precious from the URPE Office of Social Formation. I'd just like to share a bit of my reflection I've written earlier while listening and also digesting what Father has done for us now for the synthesis. I was reminded of, from the presentation of the life of Bishop Tudtud, I was reminded that even before it had already been done 700 years ago, that the encounter and dialogue has happened. And all the more, it made me realize that it's in us, it's in our genes. We long to be deeply connected with others, and the core of our spirituality bounds us to be in this one human family we all share, despite, or shall I say, with our differences in faith, culture, ideologies, races, etc., etc. All the more we are called to deeply connect to one another and build relationships of harmony and solidarity. So it has somehow left me with some of the points we can continue on pondering as we leave this conference, that as brothers and sisters of the light, there is need to forgo culture, language, and practices that divide and hurt, and learn to use a language of love and humility in the work for peace. So another example kanina is the forgoing of the use of lumad. No, thank you, ma'am, for telling us that. And also, as an Ignatian educator, there's a need to work together with other higher education institutions to strengthen the crucial role of the academe, informing citizens to be peace advocates. And as what Sir Gus just mentioned, we can train and we can have our students to be mediators, no, as means to foster dialogue. As a formator in the social formation, there is a need to review our current work in the academe and how we can further our efforts of integrating the human fraternity document invitations in the formation of our Adu Sui Generis leaders. As a Filipino, there is a need to actively work and contribute to peace, especially that we are approaching the national elections. We hope that we can become guardians of truth at this point. As global citizens, there's also a need to look into our efforts, the efforts we have done, and to see if we have consciously or unconsciously excluded others in the dialogue. Say, for example, in Myanmar setting, the Buddhist perspective in peace. No? So just an example. And as a Christian, there's a need to transform our faith and work in faith that does not proselytize, but respect and embrace our brothers and sisters. And as a peace advocate, there's also a need to live a life of dialogue and have that 3 points from the document: mutual cooperation and reciprocal understanding as our way of proceeding, rooted in love for God and humanity. So I believe, Father, that the work for healing and reconciliation is still a work in progress. As you have mentioned, it's incomplete. In fact, it seems there are more challenges than triumphs. However, we continue this work because this isn't just for us. This is for our entire human family, and we owe it to the next generation to leave a space where peace enables them to live life to the full. So thank you so much, and have a peaceful afternoon.
Thank you so much, Precious. Wonderful.
Thank you, Precious. And we now have Sir Moose. He also raised his hand. Sir Moose, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Father. Hi, everyone. Gandang hapon ulit. When I was listening kanina with the lecture of Sir Pancho, Dr. Pancho, so it really puts me in parang at the center of things that are happening in the BARM, from advocating for the passage of for the drafting pa ng BBL, lobbying in Congress, in the SEAP, in different Catholic schools, and to the passage in both houses, and then to the ratification. So the dialogue has always been there. Parang it reminds me of the life experiences of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when they were persecuted in Mecca, early days of Islam, and Islam could have been easily wiped out in the history or in the Arab Peninsula, if not for the help of the Abyssinian king, who was a Christian at the time. So when the Muslims seek refuge to their kingdom, they asked for help, and then the king said that we also worship one God, and we also worship one God. So they welcomed them. They welcomed the companions of the prophet and the family of the prophet in their place, and so they were protected. And it's almost the same thing. No? The journey that I have in Al-Kalam, no? When we were just starting having Duyug Ramadan at small mosques in Davao City with our students, and inviting our Christian students, faculty to join us in the Duyug Ramadan. And it's there, no? The connection of being part of this creation of Supreme Being. And from all of those experience, and now the challenge has always been there. Parang it's a never-ending challenge. And now here in the PTA, as a member of the parliament, the Christian settlers sector, for lack of appropriate political term, have always been approaching me, asking help. Even the indigenous peoples, communities, also asking for help, because we know naman it's in the parliament there are really series of political dynamics that are happening. It's not that easy. So right from the start, when my first, if I can share it to everyone, my first resolution that I filed in the Bangsamoro Parliament was the recognition of the human fraternity, and that the MILF, the UBJP government of the day, should never think that they can do this alone. They are governing not just for the Bangsamoro people, but for the entire people of the region, regardless of religion, identity, ethnic affiliations. So unfortunately, the challenges are still there. Like, for example, the needs of the private schools. Imagine we still have to dialogue, because there are government programs that are supposed to be given to our private schools, Catholic schools within the BARM until now, for several months, almost a year, hindi pa rin nakakarating sa kanila. So this conference somehow empowered me also, it enlightened me as well, that I should never give up, even though the challenges may be so big, so huge. But as long as we see each other as belonging to one human family, and I do hope, Father, you can always be there for us. I'll share with you some notes, but I'm fasting right now, and mahirap magsalita pag naga-fast. So.
That fasting will bring you closer to God.
Definitely. Yes, Father. Reading the Quran early morning, so I'm so happy. The entire.
Thank you, Sir Moose. Before I proceed with some other people who would like to raise their reflections, we have some from the chat box that I can just read. From Linda Noche, she says, my reflection from the sessions is that interreligious dialogue is not only important in situations as of visible or invisible religious conflict, but that it needs us to know our own religion, faith, conviction, deep enough to understand and start a dialogue with the people or parties we see as the other. So the challenge I see is how to dialogue with people who do not have the same recognition or understanding of human fraternity, not only at a personal level, but institutional level. This is going beyond promotion and living of the dialogue in the spirit of the document, and starting from personal level with family, work, friends, and other groups. Yet we need to attempt to do it at an organizational level, how to do true dialogue with them at a personal and institutional level. within the institution of same or similar religion, it is difficult enough to embrace dialogue when planning and incorporating in the different program elements and plans. Dr. Mai also said, dialogue really helps people understand each other despite of diversity, especially when it is represented by different custom, tradition, and practices. And Deo Grace de la Luz added, the challenge is how to integrate this in our life. Because even in our own families, we have battles and struggles that only us can address. Same goes to the communities. Trust to those who will mediate is also important. And I believe there is one from the youth who would also like to share. I would like to call on Yes Rin. If you could share your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes po, good. As youth sector, so para in dialogue po, it is very important na kailangan ma-represent yung every sector. For example, sa youth, kasi we all know that our community is mostly composed of youths. So it is important to include them in dialogues because we can also know their ano yung mga kailangan nila para sa ating para ano yung mga needs nila sa community natin at kasi we all know that yung youth then is yung vulnerable sector. So kailangan ma-consult din natin yung youth para maintindihan natin kung ano yung mga kailangan nating intervention din para sa kanila. So wait lang. So I think yun po yung equal participation, especially yung youth, hindi po dapat natin kinakalimutan na i-participate din sila because they also have a big role in talking about the peace. So I think yun lang po.
Thank you, Yasri. And I'm sure that a lot of you have other thoughts and reflections that you'd like to share, but unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. The Padlet will still be available for everyone if you want to post your thoughts. Just feel free to access that. The links are provided in the chat box, so feel free to post your thoughts or if you have other questions. Again, I would like to thank Father Joel for being here this afternoon and for processing the entire 2 days with us. And as we are nearing the end of our conference, we would also like to extend our gratitude to everyone who has been part of this online conference. Our co-implementer, the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, and to Secretary Carito G. Galvez Jr. Our esteemed resource speakers, Dr. Rowie Kimba, Director Vanessa Bianca Espaliarco, Ms. Sarah Lemesurier, Attorney Jennifer Buan, Dr. Francisco Pancho Lara Jr., and Brother Carl Gaspar, CSSR. Thank you to our facilitators in the reflection and distillation sessions from the Arupe Office of Social Formation, and along with our documenters, the student volunteers from the Ateneo de Davao University, and our event secretariat from the Madaris Volunteer Program and Ateneo Internationalization for Mindanao Office. Thank you as well to Father Joel E. Tavara, SJ. Finally, we would like to thank you, our participants, who participated and represented the different sectors. The religious sector, the Bangsamoro Transition Authority, and Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and Muslim Mindanao, or the BAR Ministries, Madaris and Islamic schools in the Bangsamoro, state colleges and universities, the Lumad groups or non-Moro indigenous peoples groups, the youth groups, peace centers, and peace building civil society organizations, the women's sector, the government, and media. We hope this conference made us understand deeper the document and human fraternity in light of the historical, contemporary, and social political landscapes of Mindanao, and inspired us to integrate the document into our programs and our engagements. May we continue our works and initiatives for reconciliation and peace building here in Mindanao and beyond.